cr101radio.com, podcasts, and more.
Hello, this is Nathan F. Conkey with God's World, God's Way. We're looking at work in the Bible. Last week, we were looking at Ezra. But we're looking at work with particular reference to administration, administrators, or even, if we use a bad word, bureaucrats. Now, we're sponsored by cr101radio.com in association with Grace Community School and Nicene Covenant Church. So, do please visit cr101radio.com, where you'll find free Christian audiobooks narrated by me, ebooks prepared by me, and podcasts for the Christian, maybe like you, who can't accept the easy answers. All right. Now, today's focus is the first recorded administrator in the Bible, the very first. And the number one in the Bible means something special. And that is, of course, Joseph, son of Jacob. Now, let's look at the context. Before Joseph, who was there? Noah, a lot about Noah in Genesis. Then Abraham, a lot about Abraham. Isaac, a lot about Isaac. Not so much, but quite a lot. Jacob, lots and lots about Jacob. Now, in terms of work, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, what were they? What did they do? They were businessmen. They owned and ran their own family business, passing it on to the next generation. What did they do? They bought, sold, and traded livestock. And they were very good at it because they were blessed at it. They did business God's way. God's world, God's way. And they got richer and richer through the generations. We know from the very beginning that Genesis 13:2, Abraham was very rich in cattle, silver, and in gold. And in Genesis 26:13, it tells us that the man, that is Isaac, waxed great and went forward and grew until he became very great. This was not just another commoner garden family. This was a tremendous family that Joseph was born to, but there's more. Jacob, too, in Genesis 30:43 says about Jacob, and the man, that is Jacob, increased exceedingly, and had much cattle, and maidservants, and manservants, and camels, and asses. And he had lots of other livestock too. These are tremendous businessmen. Very, very wealthy family. What they did, stock trading all day long, that was their business. Now, you might get the idea, therefore, that the only legitimate thing to do is to be owner-operator of your own business. And, well, that's just not true. Some don't have that gift. Others very much do, and it's their responsibility to develop their business. And now, we could all say that we're in business for ourselves. But anyway, God honors the office of an administrator. So if you're an administrator, Joseph should be your example. Joseph, for one thing, he gets chapter after chapter in the Bible. In which book? In the book of Genesis, the most foundational book in the entire Bible. And God says that were it not for this administrator administrating in a godly fashion, it was curtains for the people of God and for the plan of the coming Messiah. Think about that. God used not a businessman, but an administrator to accomplish this most vital end, Genesis 45. Now, therefore, Joseph says, be not grieved nor angry with yourselves that you sold me hither. For God did send me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and yet there are 5 years in which there shall neither be earing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. How did God accomplish this? Through work, and through the work not of a businessman, but of an administrator. Again, Genesis 50. But as for you, ye thought evil against me, But God meant it unto good, to bring to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive. Okay, so don't let your own mind or other people tell you that administration isn't a worthy office or dignified, or that you should move into business, entrepreneurship, if your gift is administration. Use your gift. Okay, now. Okay, so you're an administrator, or maybe there's an administrative component in your work. Joseph is the very first administrator. He gets so much space in the Bible. But what is the pattern of Joseph's life? Because he's the number one. He sets the pattern. It is, as it were, the law of first mention in the Bible. The first mention sets the flavor for the rest. What is the pattern? The pattern of Joseph's life, which sets the pattern for others in his field, is this: the pattern of constant promotion. Think about that, constant promotion, up to the very apex, the very maximum of the ability that you've been given. So, as an administrator, don't think it's a godly thing to do just to survive, just to keep your job, just to get through the day, keep your head down in the corner, just don't put too many feet wrong. No. The pattern to emulate, the godly pattern to emulate, is constant promotion up to the very apex of your given ability. Okay, let's examine that. That's the contention. Does the scripture bear that out? Let's have a look. Starting in Genesis 37:2. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. My tea was getting cold there. So it's easy to miss this. Very easy to miss this, but this is his first administrative role. Now, Joseph is the son of the favored wife, Rachel. Benjamin is younger. He's not out working. Joseph is the absolute number one. He's the apex. But at this stage, who is he in charge of? You say, in charge of? Where does the text say in charge of? Well, Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. Well, who brings the report? Someone who is delegated to a higher authority. Think of the spies in Numbers 23. Their report was brought back to the higher authority of Moses. They, as princes, were delegated this task. They went out and they came back and they gave a report. And the report of the 10 faithless spies was evil. So it's only somebody who's been delegated that brings a report. What can we conclude from this? That Joseph was already, before ever the coat of many colors, so-called, before ever that happened, he was already over someone. He wasn't, okay, who was he over? The text tells us the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and with the sons of Zilpah. Who was that? Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. Who were Bilhah and Zilpah? They were the concubines, the lesser wives, the wives without a dowry. And they were down the pecking order. There was a pecking order. Rachel was the favored one, then Leah, then the maidservant. The concubines who were also the maidservants of Rachel and Leah. So that's how life works. Joseph was the youngest of all these, which is significant, but he was ruling over them because he brought this report. He was entrusted with that responsibility. Okay. So his first administrative role, he wasn't over all of Egypt. He didn't start there. No, where did he start? Over 4 of his brothers. So maybe you are a junior sub administrator in your own, and you say I've only 1 or 2 people whom I'm responsible to direct, let's just say. Well, look where Joseph started, with 4 people. So don't be discouraged. Lots more we could say about this, but does he stop there? Does Joseph die as an administrator over his 4 brothers? Of course he doesn't. What's the next step? The very next verse. The next few verses later. Now, first of all, the next verse, Genesis 37:3. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. So there's a dynamic here. His father gives him his first administrative role over just 4 of his brothers. And then he gives an evil report. In other words, he's faithful. He does the difficult thing. He doesn't let it slide to be a decent fellow. No. He does the difficult thing. He arouses the animosity of his older brothers. And he gives a report. Now, we've already had instances where shepherds did things that they shouldn't have done. And we have that with Laban's sons. What did they do? They stole flocks. They stole sheep. The exact opposite from what godly Jacob did. He replaced sheep from his own flock to make good Laban's losses. What did Laban's sons do? They stole from the flock. So that's a concept, an idea of what this report could have been. They are pocketing this wealth for their own. Maybe they're selling it to people. Maybe they're siphoning it off to other areas, having sub-shepherds look after them maybe. I just don't know how they would have done it. But this was something serious that his father, who had delegated him to this task, had to do. And in the very next verse, what happens? He gets a promotion. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. Now, we don't have time to get into this today. We will do later on. But it is a coat of rule. And it was a coat that went down to cover his hands, to cover his feet, so that he could not engage in the ordinary tasks of hands-on work, looking after the sheep. So from that point, he was set apart. He was elevated to rule not just over his 4 brothers, but over, it looks like he was the number 2 man to Israel or Jacob himself. He was given that cloak of authority. He was his father's representative, just as later on he would be Joseph or Pharaoh's representative. Okay. So upward movement. What happens next? He was sent to check on his brothers and the flocks. Again, that's administrating. He says, Genesis 37:13, Israel said unto Joseph, do not thy brethren feed the flock at Shechem? Come, and I will send thee unto them. And he said, Here am I. So he had the disposition of obedience. His father, his Lord, his authority over him, says, do this, and he does it. And he saith unto him, Go, I pray thee, see whether it be well with thy brethren, and well with the flocks, and bring me word again. So he sent him out of the vale of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. So this is Jacob, an aspect of Jacob's godliness. Because what does Proverbs 27 tell us? Be thou diligent to know the state of thy flocks, and look well to thy herds, for riches are not forever, and doth the crown endure to every generation. So Israel, when he was doing this, was expressing his godly nature. And in turn, Joseph was being godly in his submission. But it was difficult because he knew, he wasn't stupid, Joseph. He knew that his brothers hated him. He certainly knew that Gad and Asher, Dan and Naphtali hated him, because he told them whatever scheme they had going on, which was costing his father very likely, and was enriching them, he just blew up that scheme. The money went away. The advantage went away. It was curtains for their little scheme on the side. Okay. So for him to go so far away, where he was faced with all his brothers who hated him unanimously because he was elevated above all of them, well, this would have come at some cost to him. And did it cost him something? Well, absolutely, he did. It did. Most of his brothers, all of his brothers except Reuben, perhaps except Judah as well, said, well, let's kill him. Let's just kill him. Before they saw him, said, kill him. That's the depth of their hatred, and I don't think Joseph could fail to know something of the depth of the hatred. After all, we have a precedent for that with the hatred of Esau, the murderous hatred of Esau for Jacob. That was known. Well, sometimes it was his mother that informed Jacob that his murderous brother was actually planning to murder him. And that's why he ended up going away to exile with Laban. Now, what do we find out? We find out that his brothers hated him, and although he was promoted, that promotion at each instant cost him. But at each instance, Joseph was willing to pay the price of obedience. That is, he went to the difficult situations. He said, okay, I'm going to tell on my brothers. It's part of my duty. I'm going to do it, whatever it costs me. I'm going to execute the authority of my father and just see how they're getting on. Are they stealing flocks? What are they doing? How are they getting on? And he did that. And what did that cost him? Genesis 37:28. Then there passed by Midianites merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they bought Joseph into Egypt. Okay. So, was that the end of Joseph? No, it was not. The pattern was promotion, and the pattern for any administrator, any Christian administrator who's godly, should be promotion to the very top of our abilities. So he ends up as administrator, chief administrator of the whole house in Potiphar's household. It cost him something at each turn, but despite what the nobodies thought of him, his brothers, the somebodies, that is his father, and then in turn Potiphar, they saw the goodness in him, saw the efficiency, saw the ability in him. And Genesis 39 tells us, and Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had put into his hand. So Joseph rises just as he did into his father's house. He reached the apex of responsibility. You know, how could Joseph be promoted in his father's house? He couldn't. He'd gone as high as that household would allow him. He could go no higher. And so God said, I am going to raise this guy up. It's going to be a difficult, costly process, but as long as he does so without complaining, without doubt, I'm going to keep promoting him. And that should be a lesson to us. Okay, and it came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake, and the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the fields. Okay, and just he had everything. He was in charge of everything. Was that the end of his promotion? Absolutely not. He had 2 stages to go. And again, at each time, the promotion was costly. It cost him something. And he had to persevere through faith without complaining, with an absolute conviction that the Lord would raise him up if he continued to be faithful. What do we find? He's thrown into prison with this false accusation of Pharaoh's, Potiphar's whorish wife. Genesis 32. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. Okay. Again, he rises right to the top. And it was likely by degrees, likely he just didn't start there. It was a demonstration of ability, of faithfulness. But that slow, whether it was quickly or slowly, he rose to the top, or he shot to the top. But what kind of prison was this? Was this a prison for pickpockets? A prison for no goods? No, this was the top prison in the land. How do we know that? Genesis 40. And Pharaoh was wroth against 2 of his officers, against the chief of the butlers, against the chief of the bakers. Chief. So the chief men were, next verse, and he put them in the ward in the house of the captain of the guard, that is Potiphar, into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. So this prison was a prison for nothing but the elite, those nearest to whom? Nearest to Pharaoh in influence. And we find an element of why Joseph rose to the top in verse 4 of Genesis 40. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them. So it was always service in his given calling. And the captain of the guard charged them, and he served them, right? So, although it seemed like a demotion, it was actually a promotion, because the Lord said, I'm going to promote this guy so that he's the top administrator in the world, in the topmost position. He had to maneuver him there by degrees. He had to grow as an administrator in his capabilities. He had to be adjusted for the niceties of the role. But he did rise. Rise he did. And so that access in the prison amongst the elite people gave him finally that access before Pharaoh. And finally, Pharaoh says, Genesis 41, Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand, and put upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain around his neck. Amazing. And he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. What was the pattern for Joseph? The pattern, undeniably, just can't get around it, was one of constant promotion. Promotion, he didn't have to become a businessman. What did he have to do? Stick to his knitting, stick to his area of expertise, his God-given calling of administration, ruling over people and ruling over their things. So if you are an administrator, or if your job requires administration, don't imagine that you need to become a missionary or an entrepreneur to somehow please God. You can be content that God, if he sees that you're faithful in your calling, will cause you, diligent in your calling indeed, he will cause you to serve before kings. Okay. Now, this is the pattern we see in others. In Daniel, for instance, he rises to the top. Egypt was on the back foot. He became chief in Babylon, and then that wasn't enough. He became chief in the Medo-Persian Empire. So, to close, administration is not second best, or fill in the blanks. Whatever your calling might be, it's not second best. Joseph was the first administrator named in the Bible, and it's a necessary and noble job when done well to the glory of God. And Joseph, in his calling, in the exercise of his calling faithfully, he was the key to the preservation of God's people, to their entrance, their preservation and entrance into the promised land, their becoming a nation, and ultimately the coming of the Messiah. So, don't get itchy feet and say, I have to be a missionary. No, focus on your calling and go to the scriptures for the examples and principles given for our comfort, that we might have hope, as Romans 15:4 says. Even the hope of promotion in today's very difficult circumstances, economically and in other ways. This has been Nathan F. Conkey with God's World, God's Way. See you next week.